Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to take a minute from my National Security Advisor, Bobby Zarate, to put up a photo that concerns me very much, and I'm certain it does you as well, Mr. Secretary, probably all of us here. It's a photo of CCP diplomat Wang Yi with Iranian and Saudi officials. It's not a good thing. It's the anti-Abraham Accords, in my view. What it's doing is it depicts the normalization of relations with Iran rather than our ally Israel. It's certainly not a situation that I think that Saudi Arabia and Iran would have come to of their own accord. So my question of you, Mr. Secretary, is what exactly did Communist China promise to Saudi Arabia and to Iran to get them to come to this agreement?
So, Senator, I think there's a backstory here, and I think it's in some sense a little bit more complicated. The Saudis and the Iranians have been talking for the better part of the last couple of years, including in Oman, including in Baghdad, to look to see if they could get back to where they were before they interrupted their diplomatic relations. You remember the Saudis put to death a prominent Shia cleric. That resulted in a protest or storming of the Saudi embassy in Tehran. They broke off diplomatic relations, I think, back in 2016. But in the last couple of years, not a couple of months, they've been looking to see if they could get back to a slightly more normal place. And based on the information we have, I think what China did, in a sense cleverly, was to, at the very end of that process, take advantage of the work that these countries had done and then basically host the conclusion of the agreement that they reached to restore diplomatic relations, not to bring it together themselves. They just happened to be the host of it. And I think it, sent a diplomatic signal. There's no doubt about that. I have to say, I see some positives to this as well as some concerns. The positives are these. If, and there's a big if here because we really don't know if the commitments made under this agreement will actually be implemented. That really remains to be seen. And we've seen in the past that Iran has promised to do things that, of course, it's not done. But if they do, and principally, if they cease or reduce their support to the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who, among other things, are attacking Saudi Arabia and helping to perpetuate a war in Yemen, if that stops or decreases, that can be beneficial. It can be beneficial to ending the war in Yemen. It can be beneficial to helping defend or make sure that Saudi Arabia is not under attack. There are 80,000 Americans in Saudi Arabia. We have an interest in that too. So it's a long way of saying, if this results in the curbing of some of Iran's malicious activities, I actually don't think that's a bad thing. By the way, it does not in any way substitute for our determination to pursue the deepening as well as the expansion of the Abraham Accords. I had a long discussion with Prime Minister Netanyahu about this when I was recently in Israel. We're very focused on that, and I also don't think it will change the interests of other countries in pursuing that.
To go back to the photo itself, though, I think the image itself suggests to me that China may be trying to pull our ally Saudi Arabia into their orbit, along with Russia and Iran. It also suggests to me that China may be laying the groundwork for, a petro-yuan environment rather than to replace the petrodollar. I think this is something that would benefit from a deeper conversation with you, perhaps a conversation in closed session, and I might ask the chairman and ranking member if we could arrange that at some point soon. I think that would be beneficial. I'd like to show another image that is also quite concerning. This is an image of CCP General Secretary Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin, who recently held high-profile meetings in Moscow. This is also not a good thing. In a video released overnight, Chairman Xi tells Putin that Communist China and Russia are going to be pushing for changes not seen for 100 years. And I'd like to know, Mr. Secretary, what changes not seen for 100 years is Xi Jinping talking about? And would that be detrimental to U.S. national security interests? What impact would those changes have on U.S. national security interests?
Well, I think it's no secret that both countries have a very different worldview than our own, or for that matter, a different worldview than dozens and dozens of our allies and partners around the world. And in particular, they have a different view of what a world order and rules of the road should look like than we do. And I think when it comes to China, they actually want a world order, but an illiberal one. We continue to stand strongly for a liberal one. I'm not sure that Russia or Vladimir Putin wants a world order, maybe more like world disorder, but in part as a result of having this very different worldview than we do. They have a marriage of convenience. I'm not sure if it's conviction. Russia is very much the junior partner in this relationship. And we've seen that, again, on display quite literally right here before us. Recall, as you know, right before the Russian aggression against Ukraine, they had a meeting. They talked about a partnership with no limits, and we've seen further expression of that. But as they've been doing this, we have been, over the last 2 years, re-energizing, rejuvenating, re-engaging all of our alliances and partnerships, and in ways that are paying tremendous dividends, both in dealing with the Russian aggression against Ukraine and in dealing with some of the challenges posed by China. We have greater convergence today with allies and partners in Europe as well as in Asia on how to deal with those challenges than we've had, certainly in my memory. And besides doing that, we've also created new collections, new coalitions of countries that are kind of more fit for purpose on individual issues. I mentioned earlier the Mineral Security Partnership, where we're getting countries together.
Yeah, I'm going to have to, just because of time, I have to go to my next question, but this is a topic we've discussed in the past. I know you've discussed with many of my colleagues today, and that has to do with fentanyl and the ravages that it's creating on America. We spoke about this a year ago, and since we spoke about it, how many sanctions have been placed on Chinese individuals or entities that are involved in the fentanyl trade?
What we've been working to do, the aspect of China that is deeply problematic, as you know, when it comes to fentanyl, is the production in China of precursors that then become used in the production of fentanyl. And we have had sought to try to get China to, in a cooperative way, because it's actually in their interest to do this, to deal more effectively in cracking down on the diversion of those precursors.
I'm going to interrupt just in the interest of time. I understand that you've sought to do so, but it's not worked. And in fact, there have been 0 sanctions issued since you and I talked about this. How hard would it be for President Biden to pick the phone up and call President Xi Jinping tomorrow and lay out a set of consequences, including sanctions, that are going to be delivered upon China if they don't stop sending fentanyl and fentanyl precursors here to kill our youth? 70,000 young people a year are dying at this, 23 times the deaths associated with the 9/11 attacks. This is a war on our youth. We've got to do something about it, Mr. Secretary.
And like you, I am very seized with this, including in my own engagements with Chinese counterparts and Chinese officials. We've made very clear to them that we need to see this cooperation on dealing with synthetic opioids and fentanyl. And if that cooperation is not forthcoming, we're going to have to look at other steps that we can take. What we want to do is to make sure that we are being as effective as possible. One of the challenges when it comes to, as I mentioned, China is that what often happens is perfectly, as you know, legal chemicals, precursors, get diverted either intentionally or unintentionally, in some cases, to the illicit production of fentanyl. There are agreements, systems, procedures that we want to put in place, which is why I seized the G20 with this just a few weeks ago, and now have agreement from the G20, which includes China, leading countries, economies in the world, to work on this together. For example, much better information sharing, labeling, know your customer, so that at least when it comes to the unintentional diversion of these precursors, we're doing something about that. Now, if it's intentional, that, of course, is a different matter.